This is Love Your Work, and I'm David Cadavy. Or am I? I hope you didn't mind my voice double filling in for a few weeks. That is, if you're not listening to the voice double right now. This is the time of year when humans make resolutions. Very few of those humans will actually keep them. They aren't computers, after all. Terrible at follow-through. The reason humans can't keep resolutions is that resolutions don't work. Humans would be better at reaching their goals if they built habits instead. BJ Fogg is a human and a behavioral scientist at Stanford University. He specializes in behavior design, which is like computer programming for humans. BJ has a new book coming out right now in the beginning of 2020. It's called Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything. I wanted to have him back on the show to announce the book, but then I realized that this episode is so good that it's worth running again. Since you're not a computer, you forget things. Maybe this time around, some of this will stick. Here's what you'll learn. You need to pick habits with the right characteristics to be successful in building those habits. What are the components of a habit that will stick? What are the most common mistakes humans make in trying to build habits? You've probably heard that it takes 21 days to build a habit. That's actually a myth. How long does it really take to build a habit? For a human, that is. Computers don't need time to build habits. Here's BJ Fogg. I'm here with BJ Fogg, who is a behavior change and habit building expert from Stanford. And BJ, this is going to be the first episode of 2018. I think a lot of our listeners are going to be having resolutions on their minds. So what should they be thinking of as they are deciding upon resolutions for themselves?
David, thanks. Yeah, wow, it's an honor to be top of the season. For whatever reason, we have this tradition, at least in our culture, of improving yourself, starting first of the year and doing resolutions. I've never been a huge fan of that. And as you know, and as people listening to this know, so many of those resolutions don't result in anything except for people feeling like they failed yet again. And at my research lab at Stanford, we don't study resolutions directly per se. We look at behavior and how behavior works. But I can certainly give my opinions about why resolutions are a bad idea and give better ways to change your life.
Why do you think that resolutions don't work?
I would say first and foremost, the two reasons. One is a motivation one, an issue around motivation, and which is not what people are expecting. So I'm going to talk about that next. But the first reason is, in order to really make something a reality, you have to get down to the specific actions. What's the behavior you're going to do? So I'm using action and behavior synonymously there. So if you want to be more productive, and you just have a resolution, I'll be more productive. That's very, very likely not going to happen until you define exactly what is the behavior or the set of behaviors you're going to do. And they can be framed up as, daily habits or things you do once a week or what have you. But what I found, and this is my research, that specificity helps change behavior. That trying to motivate an abstraction, like be more productive or be more creative in the abstract, does not work very well. That you need to take that abstraction and translate it into something or a set of things that are really specific. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, even some people will get to the point of for an hour a day, I'm going to, meditate, or an hour a day, I'm going to brainstorm or be creative or what have you. When people are setting that expectation, they're in a high state of motivation. What they're not accounting for, and this is the second part that I was going to say about motivation, what they're not accounting for is how slippery motivation is. As our motivation goes up and down all the time. And, early in the year, or when you're actually motivated to sit down and think about New Year's resolutions, you're in an unusually state. And so I call that motivation wave. So I've named that state motivation wave. and that wave will come down. And we're really bad at accounting for the fact that our motivation is going to sag. And when motivation drops, you can no longer do hard things. Because to do something hard, you have to have a high level of motivation. So that's the other thing that seems to go wrong with this, early in the year and people are super motivated.
Yeah, and you were talking about, for whatever reason, we have this thing that happens at the beginning of the year, but it makes sense when you understand motivation or when you understand the idea of willpower. I know that for myself, I always feel very motivated at the beginning of the year, and I believe part of it is that I've had a lot of rest. I've spent time with family. I'm seeing things completely differently. And I feel like my mental energy is replenished then because of that. So is that consistent with what you know?
Well, not what I've studied, because I don't look at that specifically, but that makes sense what you're saying. I think other people would say, oh my gosh, the holidays have exhausted me. I had all these family obligations.
Oh, yes.
I had to travel and, oh my gosh, let me get back to work so I can get my life back. And so I guess it just depends on what happens during that period of time.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to work, let's say it's work related, at least in that case, you've got disconnected from work. But I guess there's also this element of there's the symbolism to it, that it's a new year.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and that creates that motivation, and that gets people to have kind of an epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
And then they try to follow through, and eventually, obviously, the gyms are busy January 1st, but then by February 1st, they're not.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think it's terrific that in our culture, we have an annual, lasts for a few weeks, period of time where people do think about, who do I want to become? How do I change my life? And so on. The problem, as we would both totally agree on, is the way people go about it often doesn't lead to the results or the outcomes that people are hoping for.
And you were saying that habits need to be specific.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, I'm a writer. I used to decide, I want to write more. I was always very resistant to developing any sort of habit around it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, in 2016, I actually made a specific habits around writing, saying, okay, I'm going to write at that time, 500 word post every morning, first thing.
Mm-hmm.
And my word output soared. My writing started showing up in more publications and everything. So that really works. What kind of mistakes do people typically make when they're trying to build a habit, if habits are better for getting the results out of our lives?
Well, first of all, congrats to you. I think writing as a habit is one of the hardest. Meditation is a very hard habit to really wire in. And there's a few classic ones like that. So good for you. So you must have done a lot of things right. The things that, what you want to do, and David, I don't know if this maps to how you address this, but, to look at it systematically. So my work is all about a system. I call it behavior design. And it's a set of models and it's a set of methods. The models that I've created, like the Fogg behavior model or the choice model, and a set of methods. Like models are ways of thinking, methods are ways of doing or designing. And so one model, this is a very simple model that I call swarm of bees. Actually, one of my students named it swarm of bees, is you have an aspiration, and I put that actually in a little cloud or an outcome. The aspiration might be, I want to be a more productive writer. Now, there are 12, 50, probably 100 different behaviors that can take you to that aspiration. So I put little bees with arrows, like the letter B with arrows that go up to that cloud. And what you want to do is say, given this aspiration of reducing my stress or being a more productive writer or, losing weight or whatever it is, what are behaviors that will help me get there? And there's not just one, okay? And that's part of the point of this model is you have a bunch of bees around this cloud. It's like, oh, there's different behaviors and there's no one perfect behavior. So that's a way of thinking. It's a very simple model, but a powerful one to understand that there's no one magical behavior that everybody has to do. So what you need to do is match yourself with a behavior that's a good one for you or a set of behaviors. And when I say good, it has three characteristics. But before I go on to that, was the swarm of bees in the cloud, was that clear? Do you think I need to go into that further?
There's an aspiration that maps so well to kind of the way that I used to think about things and the way that I do now think about things, but I had different opinions about it before. But I might have an aspiration. It's this nebulous thing. I want to write more. Like there's something about me wanting to write more. There's something important to my identity about writing more. And there's behaviors that will make me meet that aspiration. And it's not just necessarily writing.
Yeah, exactly. And they might be one-time behaviors, something you do just once, like purchase a new app or adopt a tool or something like that. It might be behaviors you do for a limited time period. Maybe you train on something for 2 weeks. And other behaviors you would consider habits. So there's different types of, those bees, those behaviors around that aspiration. There are different types. And again, there's no one perfect behavior for you or any other writer. You have to match yourself with a good one. Now, what's up in the cloud, that abstraction of that aspiration or that outcome, you cannot design directly for. And this is where I think resolutions go wrong, is you can't design directly for that abstraction. Like I want to get more fit, I want to write more, I want to be more creative. You can design for the behavior. Now, so that's why you have to boil it down to behaviors and then match yourself with a behavior or set of behaviors. And they need to have these characteristics. Number one, the behavior actually needs to have impact. It needs to take you toward that aspiration. It can't be an ineffective behavior. So number one. Number two, it needs to be a behavior that you can do. So don't pick something that's impossible. And then number three, pick a behavior that you actually want to do. So if you can do all three things, that's a good match for you. That's the kind of behavior you should say, yep, I can do 500 words. I can do it. I want to do 500 words every morning. And it's going to be effective in leading me to this aspiration of being more productive. So that's a good match. Too often people match themselves with stuff that might be too hard or that they actually don't really want to do that much. It's like a should. Oh, I should be doing this. That's not a good match. At least part of you needs to want to do the behavior.
Okay, so it has to be effective. You have to be able to do it. It has to be something that you want to do. And that sounds perfect too, because so 500 words, I had tried that before. I had tried 1,000 words before. Mm-hmm. And I think there were certainly 1,000 words I couldn't handle at all. I could do it for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. I would totally lose motivation. 500 words, I don't think I could have done it earlier, but at that point I had practiced writing enough that 500 words was totally doable. These days I can do 1,000. I do more than 1,000 most days. But yeah, I think it sounds like there has to be like this sort of achievement window that you have to go through where it's got to be enough that your ego doesn't revolt on you and decide, like, I don't know if it's like a child or the monkey mind or there's something inside of you that says, this is an unreasonable demand. I'm not going to deal with this, and then starts fooling you into not doing the thing. Is that
well,
science?
When behaviors seem really hard, it seems like our brain has a way of helping us forget to do them or not doing them, right? And so for you to scale back from 1,000 to 500, that was great, because what people miss is that consistency matters so much more than the actual size of the behavior. So as you know, I've created a behavior change method called tiny habits. And you make the behavior really, really, really small. And when it's really, really small, then it doesn't require a lot of motivation to do it. So you can be very consistent. Now you can do more than the tiny behavior. So like if you were struggling with 500, and I'm so glad that you can do that, but not everybody listening will be able to do that, scale it back to 50. Because if you can't get yourself to 50, then that's a real, that's a signal that maybe you actually don't want to do that behavior. Maybe you need to pick a different one. But if you are consistent with 50, and most days when you do 50 words, you're really going to say, I'm going to keep going and do more. But if you stop at 50, and this is the tiny habits mindset, the tiny behavior is always fine. If you only do 50 and you stop, good for me. I'm done, you move on. But when you want to do more, you can. And here's something that I actually don't teach in the public Tiny Habits program. We teach our coaches, we train coaches in it, and I should be teaching in the public program. But as you progress and as you find yourself more and more able, let's take you, David, as you do the 500,
Sure.
Good for you for doing it. As you progress and you say, yeah, I can do 1,000, don't raise the bar on yourself to 1,000. Keep it at 500. And if you do 1,000, if you do 2,000, terrific. But if you raise the bar on yourself, then you're headed toward the approach that doesn't work, where you're now looking at something hard. You have to have a high level of motivation. The day when your motivation sags, or when you have a competing motivation, you don't do it. And then the habit starts to break.
This is something I wonder about, because I don't know. I do see that building the habit first, like the habit in itself, building the habit itself is an accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's 100 words, which I've even, after doing the 500 words, I've reverted to doing 100 words when I'm busy working on other stuff and I just want to keep practicing, I'll do the 100 words. But I don't know, at a certain point, is there a point when it's okay to start upping the ante on your habit?
No, actually, no. So I'm going to take a firm stand on it. What you did by giving yourself, like, I'm only going to do 100 words and be okay with that, that was exactly right. The way I talk about it is you want to keep the habit alive. The habit is writing every day. It's not, the word count doesn't matter. You want to keep it alive. And as long as it's alive, it's like a plant. As long as it's alive, it can grow, keep growing, but you just don't want it to die off. So if you amp up, you can do more on the days that you want to. But if you raise the bar, if you set the expectation higher and higher, then you're ultimately not gonna. There's gonna be a time when it breaks. So that's why in the tiny habits mindset. And so what you said is like right on. It's if you need to scale it back, do that. And this is really hard for people, David. Really hard to do. Even when you just do 100 words, feel good about that. Don't feel bad about it. Don't feel like, I only got 100 words. No, go, good for me. Despite the craziness of my morning, or despite all the other issues, I got the 100 words done, and good for me, and move on. It's almost, I don't want to say it's a trick, a mind trick, but it's a mindset. It's a perspective on your habit and how you change your life. And in the tiny habits world, the perspective is you acknowledge the good things. You let yourself feel good about the 100 words or even the 50 words. And the days when you don't do it, you don't get upset. You just move on and you do it the next day. And so it's about just developing this consistency at whatever size. And the smaller the behavior, the easier it is to do. In other words, it's not so susceptible to the swings in motivation.
I'm curious why you're reluctant to call it a trick.
Yeah, well, as a scientist, it's really tough to say, here are BJ Fogg's tricks.
Your weird tricks. Okay.
Yeah. It's a technique. There's things I do that I do call tricks to people that come to my boot camp and whatever. It's like, if I don't feel like working out on a given day, I just say, hey, I'm just going to go work out for 4 minutes. That's all. Set the timer 4 minutes. When 4 minutes comes, I am done. I have a gym in my garage, so it's really easy to do. Just, walk from my home office to my garage. 4 minutes, I'm done. And I get on the air assault bike, like from the CrossFit gym. I really love air assault, but I've tricked myself. I've kind of like told myself, just do 4 minutes. But here's what happens. About 3.5 minutes, there's a change that comes over me. And it's almost right on cue. So that I'm starting to like it. And by the time 4 minutes hits, almost always, I'm feeling good and I want to continue. Okay. But if I had said I got to go to 30 minutes or an hour, I would have never walked into the garage. So yeah, it is a kind of trick. But that's okay.
This is something that I did when I was writing my first book, actually. I was really struggling with getting started every day. And so I would set a timer for 10 minutes. I would do it first thing in the morning, set a timer for 10 minutes, and I'd write, and it would be like, okay. And inevitably, I would get thirsty.
Yeah.
I'd think, I need to eat something. I would be like, I need to go to the bathroom or something like that. But I would just say, nope, 10 minutes. You can do it for 10 minutes.
Beautiful.
And then the next thing I knew, none of that stuff was going on. And I was
awesome.
in momentum, and I would go for 2 hours or so.
See, good for you. I mean, that's for whatever reason in our Western culture, people say, oh, I've got to do this big thing. And if I don't do this big thing, then I can't feel good about it. And that's exactly, in some ways, at least in the tiny habits world, what I'm trying to help people understand. That's not a good way to go. And what you've done, David, is exactly the right thing. Good for you. And it's probably why you're so successful. You've been able to do that. Now, let me ask you a question. How do you, if you only do 100 words, is there a kind of self-talk or a kind of thing that you, how do you reconcile that with being the high performance, high achievement, aspiring David?
Oh, yes. That's a very good question because there's an ego component of, and I've experienced it with the book that I'm writing too, is that my last book was pretty successful. And then there's all this pressure of, well, the next book's got to be just as successful. And this is interesting. I've actually learned to take a little bit of pleasure in going the opposite route of, let's see if this silly little thing works. I'll just write 100 words a day and I'll put it on Medium. And it did surprising. It had like I have a little blog on Medium called 100 Words About. And one of my posts was 100 words about 100 words and how if you wrote 100 words a day, what that would be. And so, and it caught on for a small group of people. So yes, there is the ego bit to go around, but I'm always messing around with that because that's a big part of being a creator is getting over your perfectionism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the setting a timer is a terrific. I do that. Mostly for tasks that I don't want to do, like something with accounting or legal, or it's like, it's like, so I usually pick like 7 minutes because I don't know, because it seems a lot shorter than 10. And what you did with the timer is a great first step. The first step is, well, in some ways it's setting the timer, but the first segment is that 10 minutes. Then that propels you to do subsequent steps. That's a well-designed first step will entice you to take it. And it will propel you to take subsequent steps, whether it's that morning or whether it's the next day.
I want to be specific about this because sometimes people get confused that I'm talking about the Pomodoro technique with this 10-minute thing as an example. The Pomodoro technique, from what I understand, is you set a timer for 25 minutes and you have a 5-minute break and then you do another 25 minutes. Whereas this sort of technique is more about just getting through the start, knowing that you will probably keep going.
Yeah.
I always like to say, if I had to take a break every 25 minutes, I would reconsider my line of work.
Yeah, what we're talking about is different than Pomodoro. It is the trick yourself into getting started in writing or exercising or, doing some accounting you have to do.
I wanted to circle back to what you were saying about not upping the ante on the habit.
Yeah.
Because I experienced an interesting thing, which I would love to hear your thoughts on, which was that when I went from writing the 500 word post a day to I was then working on something else and I didn't have as much time to do that, I started writing the 100 word post a day. And a really funny thing happened, which was that when I was done with my 100 word post, I suddenly wanted to reward myself. And the way I was rewarding myself when I was finishing my 500 word post is I would, be write for an hour and a half, finish my 500 word post. And then I would go to Twitter. I'd go to Facebook. I'd go to Gmail, and it was fine because I had done something. But then after I did the 100 words, suddenly I felt like I needed this same reward and it was difficult to stop myself. Do you have any thoughts on what was going on there?
Well, let me address it this way. The thing that keeps you going, there's two different directions I can go here. I'll do the first one fast and I'll come to the second one. As you do a behavior, let's say every day, you will get better at doing it. In other words, it gets easier to do. So your skill will increase. You'll be better at writing. You'll be better at exercise. You'll be better at doing the accounting, what have you. So if it's easier to do, that means you can do more of it with the same level of motivation. So if you look at my behavior model, behavior happens when motivation, ability, and trigger come together at the same moment. And to back up about 10 minutes, it's no accident that you match yourself with behavior that you want to do and can do. That's motivation and ability. So what I'm talking about comes from a system. These are not just random principles. As you do a behavior and repeat it, it almost always gets easier to do, which means you can do it more intensely or do more of it. And so that means you don't have to increase your motivation to actually do more. So that's one thing to understand, is that over time, you will naturally do more. And if you feel successful in doing the behavior, like you writing the 500 words or 100 words, then it will increase your motivation to continue. That's why it's so important to frame whatever you did, the 100 word, the 50 word, the 400 words, to think of it as like, good for me, I got this done. Look at the positive side, because then that increases your motivation to do it again. Now, if you look at the negative side, like, oh, I did 50 words, I was 450 words deficient, then that seems to, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but it seems to make you forget or not want to do it. So what I do know, and this is, Fogg maxim number 2.
Well, it's punishment, right? Is when you fail at a goal, you basically punish yourself.
Yeah, if you feel bad about it, then you're, because you don't want to feel bad. And so it's so important to feel successful, to continue on these kinds of quests. I made a maxim out of it. It's help people feel successful. So that's if you're designing products or services. If you're doing it for yourself, it's help yourself feel successful. And I know that's going to strike people as just really odd and maybe delusional. But the way behavior works, that's really important for a lot of these challenging aspirations like productivity and creativity and stress and so on. When you match yourself with the behavior, you need to feel successful as you do the behavior. That's what keeps you going.
Maybe one element that was going on was that I was going for a goal of 100 words, but that was, I was stopping. My goal was finish a completed 100 word post. It wasn't necessarily do 100 words and it sits there and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. And so maybe there was a completion thing going on that was, again, I'm not a neuroscientist or a scientist in any regard, but I think of it as like, oh, gave myself a little dopamine hit. Yeah. And then I wanted this reward of looking at social media. So do you have any thoughts about the contours of what was going on there? And
I don't know. It's hard for me to explain that, from a systematic perspective without asking a bunch more questions about it. But instead, I'll give this generalization. Often to succeed with habits, you need to lower your standards. And I know for, people listening to the podcast and the kind of people that look at my work and so on, they don't want to lower their standards. They have high standards. That's why they're spending the time. But in reality, if you want to have habits, if you want to be good at creating habits, bringing new behaviors into your life, one of the best things you can do is just lower your standards. Like, make the behavior smaller. Don't insist on being perfect every day. If you miss a day, get over it. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't count streaks. I'm not at all a fan of streaks, because at some point that streak's going to break and it can have a demotivating effect. So, lower your standards and just really look and see in that 100 words, whether it was a finished piece or not a finished piece, it's like, I did it. I did 100 words. Yeah. Bam, good for me. Good for me.
My mind trick is permission to suck. Basically,
yes,
giving myself just the idea of permission. I don't know if this works as well for everybody else, but just the idea of permission opens up the permission to do all sorts of things, but permission to suck being one of them, relevant to what we're talking about, is like, it's okay if this isn't any good, or if this is only 100 words, That's very powerful for me. Is that consistent with other people?
Well, I think it's consistent with an effective habit maker like yourself. I think, but some people are just going to go, no, I have these high standards. I'm not sure why our culture, we're all in a certain segment of our culture. You're part of it. I'm part of it. Probably all your listeners are. And we've achieved things, through hard work. But, probably smarter than average, and maybe way smarter than average. And we're used to just walking into a class and not studying and taking a test and succeeding. But guess what? When it comes to how behavior works, people's intelligence can actually work against them. where, I'm not sure there's a correlation between being super smart and being able to effectively create habits, unless you get outside the kind of the traditional paradigm of, set a goal, track yourself toward the goal, make sure you have a streak, it's this big thing. I think a lot of those things can be misleading, and as you go through the process, discouraging. So I think what you're talking about and your success on what you've done is unusual because people don't figure that out. And it took me quite a few years, looking at behavior and my own behavior model and creating tiny habits and then sharing tiny habits with thousands of people. And now I've coached 40,000 people, over 40,000 people myself. I've individually coached through email over 40,000 people. And it's like the patterns are just super clear. What works is very, very apparent. But it goes against the traditional notions that either we see on TV or read in magazines, and certainly not the tradition of just, set a New Year's resolution and somehow magically that aspiration will come true.
We're going to take a quick break. When you started your business, did you dream about all these admin tasks like drafting proposals and contracts, tracking down payments? Probably not. You don't want to be scrambling up your brain, switching mental states all day. You know that is a creativity killer. And that is why there is HoneyBook. HoneyBook is an online business management tool that organizes your client communications, booking, contracts, and invoices. It even automates tasks in your business. It's all in one beautiful interface that keeps you on top of your business. HoneyBook even consolidates the services you already use like Gmail, QuickBooks, and Google Calendar. That way you're not shifting around trying to search for information. And right now, HoneyBook is offering our listeners 50% off when you visit honeybook.com/loveyourwork. Payment is flexible, and this promotion applies whether you pay monthly or annually. Go to honeybook.com/loveyourwork for 50% off your first year. That's honeybook.com/loveyourwork. I think this overachievement characteristic, or I'll just go ahead and conflate it with the idea of perfectionism because it's probably somewhat related. It's interesting, and this might be an uncomfortable thing for people to consider, is that perfectionism is really like thinking of yourself as a perfectionist is a real humble brag, ego stroking thing to think. If you ask job candidates, "Oh, what's your biggest weakness?" They're gonna smirk and say, "Well, I'm a perfectionist." And it feels good to feel that way. And at least I've found as a writer that feeling that way can prevent me from actually doing what's important, which is doing the writing.
Yeah. I think you're making a great point there. And it's almost like in some ways in areas where we don't have a lot of vested interest that we can make more progress.
Yes.
Like, for example, I like music, but I know I'm not a very good musician. But I love music. So I'll pick up instruments like ukulele or slide whistle or recorder and play them consistently and just enjoy this amateur thing that I'm doing, But if it were an area where my, say, ego is really tied up or my professional credibility or status, then I can't be as playful. Or, knowing what I know now, it's like, no, just, have fun with it. You're giving this really important keynote or you're doing this webinar series, just go and be yourself. And if you mess up, hey, that's cool. That's fine. Just, I don't know, just ways of getting beyond that every single time you do something, it's going to affect your professional reputation or your ego or your sense of self. Maybe that's what beginner's mind is. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but maybe that just came to mind of maybe that's what it means is you're willing to just put it out there and maybe it's not going to be perfect.
I experienced something similar with, like I was saying that I have this writing habit and I would publish these articles on Medium. And this is going to be a sort of a confession to my listeners, I guess, is that people will ask me stuff about Medium and what's your strategy? And I'm like, I just write 500 words every day and I put it up. And here's the confession, which is I don't think of it that seriously. I actually think of it, I don't take it seriously at all. There's certainly times where I do write and I write harder and I write more seriously, kind of like you might go to the gym and some days you're really intense and other days you're happy that you made it. But most of the time when I'm writing on there, I'm just happy that I wrote something. And it has it's like a reverse psychology effect because the work ends up being much better than the non-existent work that I would have done or not done had I taken it more seriously.
Yeah. I'm going to make one very specific suggestion to the people listening because I love what you're saying. And I like how you have figured out on your own without doing like experiments, thousands of people of how to create this habit. If you're listening and it's like, oh yeah, here's this thing I want to do. Yes. And I'm falling into this perfectionism trap that David's talking about. Just one time, give yourself permission to lower your standards or, do a bad job just once and go, good for me. I did it. I did this thing, whether it was good or bad, just try it once. And the reason I'm saying that is it might seem too impossible, David, for people to go, okay, I'm going to lower my standards after 20 years of being this high achieving person. And now I'm hitting some roadblocks and I still have to be this high achieving, perfect person. They may not be able to say, I'm going to lower my standards from now on. So I'm saying do it once and see what happens. And then maybe do it for 3 days in a row and see what happens, just to build your confidence that you can do it.
I love that advice because it brings up a point that I think is very important, which is that the act of lowering your standards is a skill that I've found anyway, is that I still struggle with it all the time, every day. But I have gotten better. I've found that I can sit down and get on a keyboard and write stuff that isn't good. And that's an accomplishment that I can do that without feeling paralyzed, without feeling the self-judgment all the time. And it's something that I'm constantly fighting is, can I do work that's below my standards? Which
David, I can see it now. Somebody's going to tweet, BJ and David talk for an hour about lowering your standards. The value of compromising.
Yeah, but I think it's just, there is a skill to quieting the internal critic for some people, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And some people will be able to do it better than others. I think it's kind of a trust issue of, this doesn't mean I'm lowering my standards everywhere. It just means to kickstart, to get this, because we're really talking about habits at the end of the day. At least that's what I think we're talking about, is to get that habit going, to get it rooted into your life. And I say rooted after thinking for many years about how habits work. Habits work a lot like plants. And if you think of a habit like a plant, you'll understand that at the beginning, it doesn't matter how much of the plant is above the surface. What you want is the roots to grow and take root. You want the roots firmly planted. Now, the roots are like the automaticity. It's like how reliably do you do the behavior? And it doesn't matter what's above the surface, because once the roots are there, then the part on top can grow. If the part on top grows and the roots aren't there, and just like in a plant, what happens? The plant's not going to survive. So by artificially, saying, oh, I'm going to write for an hour a day, and I haven't quite figured out where it fits in my life, where do I put this? In Tiny Habits, we have a method for that. Where does this fit naturally in my life? And so on. And just like, if you planted a new tomato plant, it had an inch of roots, but it was 3 feet tall, that tomato plant is not going to survive. So just really, the process works like that. It's like, how do I get this habit firmly rooted in my life, no matter what the size is? And once that's happening or done or it's growing, then you can increase it if you want. And it's and that's probably the most powerful metaphor or analogy. You can tell me, David, which one it is, even though I have a couple degrees in English, I don't remember. But thinking of habits like plants is a very powerful and accurate way of thinking about it. Right now, 100 yards from me, they're transplanting palm trees. And I saw them on the side of the road. And so they've got these full-grown palm trees, and they're going to go put them in the earth in this big hole. And it's a huge production. And I think it's going to take a lot of care and feeding to make sure those palm trees survive. Whereas these coconuts that are floating around or just happen to be in the right spot that grow just on their own without a lot of care and feeding. And you can think of big habits in that way. If you want to start with something big and massive, it's like transplanting a big tree, which means it's going to take a lot of effort and energy and a lot of care feeding. And you may have picked the wrong spot for that habit, or you may not know how to keep it nurtured. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm always like, no, start it really, really small, find where the habit fits, and then grow the roots. And the roots, the way I think about it, as you feel good about what you've done, like good for me for doing 100 words or 500 words, 50 words, that like grows the roots. That helps it get more firmly planted. And then you can play around with, doing more than that. And you may find that, 622 words is optimal for you, but you don't always have to do that. You can always do 100, and 100 is fine.
I'm glad you brought up this transplanting analogy. I guess it's an analogy. I don't know. I don't have any English degrees because tiny habits really helped me when I was transplanting myself. I had a nice, healthy workout schedule habit going, and I had a number of things that would help me keep that in place. One of them was that I would go to group classes, and so I would have to go to class because it was on a certain schedule, and if I missed it, I would be totally screwed. But then I moved to Colombia, and so as I was moving, I was like, well, there's not group classes of the style of fitness that I want to do, and I'm moving. I'm just struggling to figure out how to feed myself when you get discombobulated like that. And so my habit was, after the writing session on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I would go to the gym for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just total acceptance. Go to the gym for 15 minutes, feel good about it. It doesn't matter what you do, just go. And after, maybe a couple months of that, then I started ramping it up to 30. And then I had a trainer design a program for me. And so now I don't have to think about it. There's a lot less mental energy going into maintaining that habit. I have not missed a workout in the 2 years that I've been here.
Well done. There's patterns to all of this. And what you're describing, there's the pattern where as you feel successful, even on small things. So, one of the patterns is, you've heard this and your listeners have heard this: change leads to change and success leads to success. That's a pattern. And even though those sound like cliches, that's how habits work. And so you can start anywhere, because as you feel successful, you'll do more. As you change, you open yourself to other changes. So you went 15 minutes or bigger workout to a trainer. You probably were too afraid or not confident enough or even wanted to have the trainer when you started. So your wants will change over time. So that's what you shouldn't, I say should, you shouldn't start with shoulds. Like, I should, be working out, an hour a day in the morning. If that's not if you don't want to start there, don't start there. But trust that that as you progress with something small and something related, that thing that felt like a should will become a want. And it's just like taste change, and what you want changes over time if you're doing, related behaviors, however small, and feeling successful. And the key is this, that you naturally start doing bigger things without even designing it specifically. It just happens. There's this ripple effect. And I was measuring that. 80% of plus people reported that within 5 days, they started doing other behaviors. About 18% on average reported doing a big behavior.
Wow.
And so there's this ripple effect. And then it finally clicked, the mechanism. The mechanism is like, what caused this? What was behind it? And it was an insight that I had that didn't come out of, actually running an experiment, but and now I'm quite sure, because I started measuring this in other ways, but here's what happens. As you do a behavior, let's say, let's go to nutrition. A lot of people want to eat better. As you start eating better, even if it's very, very small, let's say you just eat, a healthy snack in the afternoon. As you do that and feel good about that behavior, however small, you will start thinking about yourself in a new way. You will start thinking, I'm the kind of person who eats healthy snacks. oh, I'm the kind of person who eats healthy, and it will generalize out and affect other aspects of your nutrition. So in other words, there's an identity shift that happens when people do a behavior like writing 50 words a day. Oh, I'm a writer. Or eat healthy snacks. I'm the kind of person who eats healthy. And then that ripples out to other parts of their life. And once I saw that, and then once I confirmed it through, the measurements I was doing on a weekly basis, I was like, oh my gosh, that's like amazing. Even a small thing, if people feel successful about it, even changing a small thing will shift that person's identity. And then that opens them up to other changes, and it propels them to continue. And I was like, oh my gosh, there it is. There's the trick. I don't want to call it trick. There's the key right there. There's the crux. Give me a good word there, David. You're a word guy.
I would call it a trick, but I can do that because I'm an info marketer. So,
but there it is, right? And so, but you can't go to somebody directly and go, hi, you are a person that cares about nutrition, or hi, you are a consistent writer. You're a writer. At least I don't think you can do that. But what I do know is when people see evidence that I'm the kind of person to eat healthy snack, it changes how they think about themselves. And then that identity shift then has ongoing effects. And wow, I think that's it right there. I mean, that's what you want. Now, that being a healthy eater doesn't generalize to I'm the kind of person who cares about my finances, or I'm the kind of person who gets a lot of sleep. There are it seems to be these identities are connected with different domains.
Yeah, I've seen this. I guess I think of it as sort of like the way that a crack grows on a sidewalk or something, mm-hmm. or the way that the Grand Canyon has been carved, that it just happens over time if you just get that first thread started. And I have a relevant story to one of the listener questions. We were on Twitter. There was one of the listeners who was asking, is there any tiny habit practice to break social media addiction? And I actually had an experience like that where I was scrolling through Facebook, sometimes an hour at a time, literally saying out loud, I do not want to be doing this. And the way that I overcame it was I was having a conversation when I first met a friend. He was saying, oh, I get like a pile of books from the library and I just set them out in front of me and I pick one up and I look at it for a second and I pick another one up and I look at it for a second. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting because when I pick up a book, I feel pressure to finish the book. And so it was interesting that he had completely flipped everything so that he had permission to pick up a book, read just the subheads or pick up a page and start reading it there, or read the table of contents. And so I started doing that. I got a whole bunch of books. I set them out. And anytime I felt the trigger of wanting to go on Facebook, like a little tinge of anxiety or something, I would pick up a book, and I had total permission to read as little or as much as I wanted. But at least the thing was that when you gain momentum in picking up Facebook, then you just end up with your brain fried because you have gone through a million different newsfeed items. But when you gain momentum in reading a book, now you're reading a book. Now you're doing slower, more methodical thinking, and the design of the artifact that you're interacting with is shaping your behavior.
Yeah, I love that as an example. Let me give a method, a method that I teach in my boot camps for deriving that and other options. So up in the little cloud, up in the aspiration cloud, I mean, you just write it down and then say, oh, use Facebook less, or stop using Facebook, or don't use Facebook in the evenings, whatever your aspiration is. And then imagine, and I call this method magic wanding. Imagine you have a magic wand and you can get yourself to do any behavior that would lead to using Facebook less. What would you wish for? What would you have yourself do? And write that down. And then you have another wish. Same thing. You can, what else? If you get yourself to do anything, well, maybe it's delete Facebook from my phone. Okay, great. What else? So you come up with a whole bunch of different behaviors by thinking, if I could get myself to do anything, what would it be? Have a stack of books and flip through, call my mom, what have you. And so generate 10 to 15 of those behaviors and then choose among those. So in other words, you're looking at a range of options through the magic wanding method. And you can do more than 15. Some people are great at coming up with options. Some people are really kind of slow at it. And then go back and look at those. Some of them are going to be impossible. Some of them you actually don't want to do. Match yourself with those that are going to be one that's going to be effective. It's easy to do and you actually want to do it, and then put it into practice. So then you can take that and design for it.
The tiny habits method seems like it's actually especially equipped for breaking things like social media addiction, because I guess it's a relatively new thing that we have technology in our lives sort of manipulating, for lack of a better word, our motivation. And so something like my book reading thing was just kind of making books more like Facebook, or like making it able to, giving it a fighting chance against these little hits that you get throughout the day.
Again, I want to say, I want to go two directions with this, but I'll do the short one first and then go into the main direction. Good habits, what we call good habits and what we call bad habits, form in the same way. Like nature or human nature doesn't care whether we consider Facebook is good or bad, or, push-ups good or bad. They start small. They find a place in our lives where they fit well and they can take root. So going more with a plant analogy, some of those are like weeds, right? And so you got to identify, wait, this is becoming a consistent thing. I got to uproot this, or I've got to put something else in its spot. So that's kind of the simpler piece. It's good habits and bad habits forming the same way. The tiny habits, it's really, it's not a random set of principles. It was derived by looking at my own behavior model, motivation, ability, and trigger, and seeing that if it's really easy to do, then it's not going to be so dependent, reliant on motivation. Wow, make it really easy to do. And then there has to be a prompt or a trigger. What can that be? Oh, it's a routine you already have. And so when I say, where does it fit in your life? It's like, what does it come after? It's easier to create habits in the morning than any other time of the day, for most people anyway, because for the reason you said, your morning is structured, it's routinized, it hasn't gotten crazy yet, you haven't had any huge emergencies. And so, and I saw that actually, I was doing a class in 2000, I want to say 9 or 10 at Stanford on health habits. I had my students make an inventory of all the daily habits that they did. And they had to craft it very carefully and turn it in. And what I saw very clearly was they had a bunch in the morning and they tapered off some in the middle of the day and some in the evening. But the morning was a lot of health habits going on. Now you may think that means that, there's no more room for new habits in the morning, but that's not the case. If they are small, if they don't take a lot of time, that's the best place to put a new habit if it doesn't take tons of time, like 50 words or 100 words. How long? Now, 500 words, that's pretty big. And this is why, I'm congratulating on being able to make that work.
I know it goes against your advice totally.
Well, but yes and no. I mean, it wasn't, you went from 1,000 words down to 500 and so on. How long does that take?
At first it was taking me, it wasn't just 500 words, it was to complete a 500 word post, because there was a shipping element to it. So that makes it really complicated and hairy to think about, because we're talking about momentum and such. And so since there was an end to it, it's a little different. But at first it was taking me an hour and a half. Sometimes it was taking me an hour. So.
Okay. So David, and this is great and congrats to you. But just so you and I don't mislead people listening to this, if that's the habit that you want, try it. If it doesn't work, scale it way back.
Oh, and I want to just add the caveat that this was my job. So as far as I was concerned, this was my job. So it's not like I was...
Okay. But there are going to be people...
500 words before I go to work.
There are going to be listeners that want to write regularly or do some other thing that they're not their job. Try it. Try the bigger form. And if you get it, awesome, good for you. If you don't beat yourself up that it was a willpower issue or a motivation issue. Just say, okay, I'm going to start smaller. One way I explained it to the people that come to my boot camp, my boot campers, which boot camp's about training and behavior design. Tiny habits is a very specific method, where boot camp is the broader training umbrella. It's if you wanted to, play beautiful music, you wouldn't start with a concerto. You would start with something simple, and you would start with something you actually like, and you'd work up to the concerto. If people dive right in and say, I'm going to write 2,000 words every morning from now on, that's like somebody who doesn't play the piano saying, I'm going to play this concerto. It's just going to be frustrating. And so I'm thinking that you did the etudes and you did the simple pieces and you worked your way up to the point where even if it is your job, you're able to do that. I mean, it wasn't you just suddenly did that. There was a progression of skills.
Years before I could do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and if you could articulate what those steps were, so I've not worked on that particular habit of writing or any kind of creativity, but if you could say, hey, here are the different ways to start. And there's more than one way to start, just like swarm of bees. Do this and make progress and just trust over time. You're going to have more skill and more motivation to do this bigger thing. Because I don't want people to think just by listening to you and me talk that then they're going to magically be able to play the concerto or write 2,000 words in the morning.
Yeah.
Every day.
Well, it's funny you mention it because actually the book that will be out by the time this conversation is out is called The Heart to Start. So it's all about starting. So
nice.
Perfect for our listeners to
check
that out. And I want to make sure that we cover another listener question before we go.
Okay.
We had one listener asking probably about the thing that you hear over and over again, that I'm going to say it's a myth, I'm guessing, that it takes 21 days to build a habit. This listener wanted to know, what does the science say about how long it takes to build a habit? Does it depend on the person? What sort of factors control this uptake time? And it sounded like you had a long answer, so I don't know if there's enough time for it, but that's the question.
Yeah, I'll try to give a short answer to it. First of all, you would have to define what habit is. And people I've come up with, there's 7 different uses of that word. The way I think about habit is it's an action that you do without thinking. So it's something you do quite automatically. You're not deciding, you're not deliberating, you just do it. And so what defines habit in that context, it's automaticity. How automatically do you do it? So it's a spectrum. So it's a continuous variable. So when it's defined that way, then those questions about how long does it take to create a habit, I mean, that question assumes that there's a threshold. One day it wasn't a habit and the next day it was. And that's not how it works. Its behaviors will get more automatic, and then might be a weak habit and then a strong habit. And then ultimately what I call a reflex. Like, it's so strong and automatic, you have to put in work to stop it. So I don't really buy into any of the research that says X number of days, at least not from the way I define habits. So they probably have ways they've operationalized that term. Now, to just kind of put an exclamation point on it, there are some behaviors that you do that once you do it one time, either it will become a habit, like you'll do it again without thinking, or you'll be on your way. Let me give an example. Right now, I'm sitting 10 feet away from a rocking chair that's on a lanai, which is a patio. And it's this outdoor rocking chair that folds up. Well, before I had that rocking chair, I just had like a chair from Home Depot, like a garden chair. So I'd sit in that chair in the evening and sit there and read and what have you. Then one day, I got this foldable rocking chair, like this camp chair. And I put it on the lanai and I sat on it. And after about 10 seconds, I was like, man, I love this. Guess what? From then on, I never sat in the Home Depot chair. I always sat in the rocking chair. So after sitting in the rocking chair one time, that then became the habit. How long does it take a teenager to create the habit of carrying a cell phone around? Almost instantly. Some people, after the first time they use Lyft or Uber, they never consider going out in the street and hailing a cab again. So look at habit as a function of automaticity. And what you're really trying to do is for like writing or going to the gym or doing push-ups, is how do I get myself to do this without deciding? If you're deciding yes, no, go to the gym, it's not a very strong habit. Now that's not necessarily bad. Right now in my life, has been so varied There's never been a consistent time in my day when I can go work out. So every day I am deciding, when am I working out? So it's not a habit, but I do it every day. It's a very reliable behavior, and that's okay. Okay. So I think we might get tangled up in the word habit a little too much. Maybe somebody writes 500 words every day, and maybe they don't do it automatically, but they do it reliably. And that's okay. There's sometimes our lives work like that.
Thank you so much, BJ, for coming on and talking about habit building. So it sounds like for 2018, if people want to build habits, probably going to work better than a resolution. They should start very small, make it something that is attached to some sort of anchor, some sort of other thing that's going on in their life, and go ahead and use the momentum. Is there anything you would add to that?
In a nutshell, that's great advice. And there's a lot more online that you can discover from me and others. But yeah, bjfogg.com or tinyhabits.com. And I have a whole set of videos coming out. In fact, right now in the new year, I have a video series on habits. So check those out.
Great. Thank you so much, BJ.
David, great to talk to you. It's a blast. Thanks again.
Is Love Your Work helping you find your unique creative voice? Does it bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to become the creator and human you want to be? If so, please be a part of making this a special and nourishing and thoughtful show. Support the show on Patreon. You'll be an even bigger part of this show than you already are. If you contribute just a coffee a month, you'll be helping support the hosting and production of Love Your Work. Everyone has some unique creative gift to offer the world. Together, we can give people the tools they need to bring that work into the world. The world will be better off for it. Visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/Cadavy. This is a different kind of model for supporting the work that you love. The choice is yours. Vote with your dollars, put your money where your mind is, and keep Love Your Work going. Visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/Cadavy. As a thank you, you'll get early access, bonus content, and a discount on Love Your Work merchandise. Learn more at patreon.com/Cadavy. That's patreon.com/KA, D as in David, A, V as in Victor, Y. And if you can't support the show financially, and you've listened to at least 3 episodes, can you do me a favor? Write a review on Apple Podcasts. You can consider it your donation to help support the show. Love Your Work is brought to you in part by our top Patreon supporters, such as Jeffrey Mason. This has been Love Your Work, and I'm David Cadavy. The theme music for this show is At Sea by Dorena from the album About Everything and More by arrangement with Deep Elm Records at deepelm.com. Love Your Work is a production of Cadavy, Inc.